Sir, news from the underground.
Hello and welcome to the Underground. I'm your host, Duncan Michael McPherson, and this is the podcast where we talk about the world and how crazy and weird and messed up it is. Today on the podcast, I guess what I want to talk about is Omicron, and I want to talk about the vaccines and their effectiveness against Omicron, because the evidence is suggesting that the vaccines are not working as well as they did. They seem to work a little bit before, although they were far from perfect, and I think people have trouble admitting that. But they were not the success that they were supposed to be. So on my screen here, I have what website? This is the covid19.ontario.ca. So this is a government website about Ontario and about vaccination status. So this is COVID cases by vaccination status for the past 30 days. Okay. Now, at the end of November, the unvaccinated cases, the rate of unvaccinated cases was at about 10, November 24th, and partially vaccinated at 4.93 and fully vaccinated at 2.63. So it seems like even though there's quite a few breakthrough cases with the vaccine, it does seem to lower the rate of cases. So that's pretty significant. 10 unvaccinated cases, the rate is 10 unvaccinated to 2.6 vaccinated, fully vaccinated. So it does seem like the vaccine stops you from getting COVID somewhat. Now, obviously, like, that's not perfect, and I still think, like, I would still say, like, even at that, like, that's not what we expected to see in the vaccines. We expected the vaccines to stop COVID, and so you couldn't get COVID. Just like, I think everybody knew that it was going to be a little bit flawed, but I think everybody thought it was going to be better than it actually is right now, or was back then. Now is a different story because it's gotten much worse, and the vaccines seem to have failed significantly more. The problem is that now with Omicron, we're at unvaccinated cases. The case rate is 27.8. That's per 100,000. And the fully vaccinated are actually higher than the partially vaccinated at 25.7. And it's looking like, if we go to the number of cases recently, it's starting to look like, I don't know. I don't know if I would say you're more likely to get COVID if you're vaccinated, but it's starting to look like it's at least equal. If this trend continues, it looks like fully vaccinated people their rate of getting COVID will be actually higher than unvaccinated people. So there's two explanations for this data, right? The one could be that that the vaccine is waning, right? The efficacy of the vaccine is waning. That theory that the vaccine is waning, I don't think that's controversial for people. I mean, Doug Ford just announced that they're going to make it so that you can get a booster at the 3-month mark, which is insane. And when people compare this vaccine to like the polio vaccine or measles, when you get the polio vaccine, very few people get polio. When you get the measles vaccine, there's very few people who ever get measles. This vaccine does not work the way that those do because it's not as effective as those are. If that line goes above the unvaccinated, I mean, trying to convince somebody to get vaccinated is pretty crazy. That means that unvaccinated people are getting COVID at a lower rate than the vaccinated people. If you're still following the narrative, if that line goes over the other line, even right now, like, they're very close. So unvaccinated, as of today, December 23rd, unvaccinated is at a rate of 27.8 per 100,000 and fully vaccinated 25.7 per 100,000. Now, I will say that The vaccines have shown pretty good examples or pretty good efficacy against hospitalization and death. So there's that. The problem is, though, there's one problem, right? The one problem is that the COVID variants could go in a bad direction and actually get worse. Now, that doesn't seem likely because that doesn't seem to be, history would suggest that's not really how it works. And science would suggest that a virus wants to get less deadly but more contagious, which is exactly what Omicron did, which is exactly what I predicted this virus was doing. Not even that it did do it, but that it's been doing that each. Because if you go back and you look at, actually, let me go to this one. So this is on Worldometer, and it's outcome of cases, recovery or death in Canada. So this has, let me explain. So at the bottom is the death rate, which is in yellow, and it starts in February 2020, and it goes up very high for 2 weeks during March. So there was 2 weeks there where it goes as high as, I think, March 23rd. It was up. March 20th, it was at 46% death rate. That's incredibly high, right? And I definitely will admit that I was wrong about the virus and its severity. I definitely didn't think that it was going to be as serious as it was. That was only for 2 weeks, though, in March. And then it dropped down and kind of went back up and got as high as 13% death rate, which is still a dangerous disease. But that's May of 2020. Since then, it has steadily dropped, and it is now at 1.66%, which I still think is kind of high, but I'm not going to argue with the data. It doesn't show where they got the data from, so I can't look into it, but that's very low. 1.66% of people are dying from it, which means that 98.35% are recovering. So I think one important thing to realize is that we're dealing with a different disease today than we were dealing with back in March of 2020. I just think that we're dealing with a different disease. Actually, I don't even think we should call it COVID anymore. Let's change the name to Omicron, or, we can change it to something more friendly, since it's a much friendlier disease than it was in the beginning. But it's a different disease than what we saw 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, right? And I think we need to acknowledge that, and acknowledge that this is a different disease, and we don't need to live in this way that we were in the beginning. And I think we're having trouble letting go of the way we dealt with it in the beginning, because it is named the same disease. So it seems like it's just as scary as it was 2 years ago, and it's not as scary. I also wanted to mention that next week I am going to do an interview. I think it's going to be on Thursday. So I want to learn about what their story is, and this kid being allergic to the vaccine, or to the whatever vaccine they were allergic to, and how they cannot get an exemption for this COVID vaccine. I'll end it here. Thanks everybody for listening to the podcast. Enjoy your day, and what do I always say? Stand up to your government, because they're being tyrannical, and we need to do something and speak up and say something. Thanks for listening to The Underground, and please like and subscribe, or most importantly, share this with your friends if you like the content. Thanks everybody for listening. Bye.